Hi, this is Emily Midget from Sixth Street Sundries, here today with a video on how to create a dimensional look for your watercolored flowers by using 2 Zig markers with your damp paintbrush. I will also show you my method for achieving a watercolored halo around my stamped image. Let's get started. For my supplies, I have a number 4 round paintbrush, my Zig markers, Canson Montval watercolor paper, which is my personal favorite to use with Zig markers, and the Hello Lovely stamp set from Concord and Ninth, which I've heat embossed onto my A2 panel using white satin pearl embossing powder and taped to my cutting board. I also have my jar of clean, clear water and my trusty absorber. For my main flower, I'm going to use 2 Zig markers, light carmine and tea rose. One of the great things about Zig markers is that they blend with each other beautifully. You can blend each individual marker together just as easily as you can blend the colors with a paintbrush. From what I've found, this technique works best on watercolor paper. To start, I simply lay down a bit of the light carmine, which is the darker of the 2 shades, towards the center of the flower, then just use the tip of my tea rose marker to pull the color out and create a smooth blend of the 2 colors. I then use the tip of my damp paintbrush to pull the color out even further and create a nice shade. You can see that I'm turning my cutting board frequently. This is to allow gravity to help me in pulling the pigment down when I use my Zig marker or my damp paintbrush to blend the color out. I have my cutting board elevated at a slight angle to help me achieve this. For the petals that have curled up at the edges, I want a softer version of the main flower color, because those edges would be turned toward the sun and therefore have more light on them. This makes the color less intense. To do this, I touch the tip of my 2 Zig markers together to get just a hint of the light carmine on my tea rose marker, then lay down the color on my petal. As I've mentioned in my previous video, which I'll link below, the key to getting great dimension with Zig markers is to add many layers of color. After coloring all of the petals with the first layer, I go back in with both colors to add more pigment to areas in which I feel should have a greater concentration of color. This includes the areas of the petal nearest to the center of the flower, as well as any petals that might be behind one another, which would result in a shadow and a more concentrated color. Adding this extra layer of color creates a great deal more depth on your flower. Occasionally, I get too much pigment in the center of the petals, which creates a more one-dimensional look. To remedy this, I simply add water to the area of the petal which I want to lighten, then quickly dry my paintbrush on my absorber, and use the dry paintbrush to vacuum up the excess water, and with it, the color. For the smaller flowers in the bouquet, I use just one color, sugared almond pink. For the sake of time, I showed just a few of the flowers being painted. The tiny daisies were colored using pink flamingo. As always, I go back in with a second layer of color after the first has dried to add that extra kick of dimension. For the foliage, I simply lay down the color towards the middle line of each leaf, because this is where the shadows would be darkest. Then pull the color out with my damp paintbrush. Again, I go back in with a second layer of color to achieve greater depth. For the 3 different types of leaves, I used 3 different shades of green: emerald green, turquoise green, and Persian green Zig markers. To create the halo around the edge of the floral spray, I chose to use Shadow Mauve, which is my personal favorite for creating this subtle halo. It adds just a touch of contrast to make some of the lighter flowers pop more from the white background of the watercolor paper. To create this halo, I have found that the key is lots of pigment and lots of water. Normally, I prefer to keep my paintbrush just lightly damp, dabbing off some of the water onto my wet absorber. For this halo, however, I first lay down a thick layer of the chosen color, in this case, Shadow Mauve, around the edge of the watercolored image. Then use my very damp paintbrush to loosely pull the color out. Because I want an ethereal, loose look, I just play with my wet paintbrush, pooling the color in some areas of the panel while diluting almost all of the color in other areas of the panel. After initially pulling the halo out, I will clean my paintbrush in my clean water jar, then use that clean water to fade the line of the halo even further. After the first layer has dried sufficiently, I go back in again and add another layer of color, sometimes to the interior spots of the floral bouquet and sometimes in the larger bare spots. Normally, creating harsh waterlines and blooms is something I try to avoid with careful blending, but for these halos, I let my inner artist come out and just let my paintbrush go where it may. I love the loose, artistic look this technique achieves. To create the rest of the card, I used the fantastic card frame dies with the Kind add-on from Concord and Ninth, which I cut from some teal foil from a DCWV 6x6 stack. I added dimensional adhesive all around the edge. I also stamped my For My and Hearted Friend onto a strip of light pink cardstock and added some more dimensional adhesive. I adhered everything to my watercolored card front, finally adding a few sequins here and there to add even more texture and dimension to the finished product. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial showcasing another technique using Zig markers. I love being able to create custom colors with my existing supplies, and the depth and dimension you can achieve with Zig markers is fantastic. If you liked my video, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more watercolor projects, head over to my blog at emilymidget.com. Thanks so much for watching!